The night air outside the old theater carried the smell of rain and street food, and a thin boy stood barefoot near the side entrance, clutching a battered guitar with strings that had been changed more times than he could remember. His name was Miguel, though most people on the streets of Cebu only called him the Elvis Kid. He had learned early that a nickname could be warmer than a blanket when the nights grew cold. Inside the building, lights flared and voices echoed as contestants lined up, dreaming of applause and judges' smiles. Miguel did not know what waited for him beyond those doors, only that he had sung his way across sidewalks, ferries, and alleyways, and tonight he would sing on a stage that felt as big as the ocean he had crossed in his imagination. Miguel's life had never followed a straight road. He was born in a small coastal barangay where fishing boats rocked gently and the sea sang its own songs. His mother used to hum while cooking rice, and his father played old cassette tapes of Elvis Presley that he had bought secondhand. The voice from those tapes felt magical to Miguel, like a promise that even a poor boy could sound like a king. When his father fell ill and work disappeared, the family drifted toward the city. Cebu was loud and fast, full of buses, horns, and people who did not have time to look down at a child singing for coins. When his mother passed away not long after, Miguel learned to survive by singing. He sang for jeepney drivers stuck in traffic, for tourists waiting for ferries, for shopkeepers closing their stalls. Every song was a prayer that tomorrow would be kinder. The Elvis songs became his shield. Love Me Tender when the nights felt endless. Can't Help Falling in Love when hunger twisted his stomach. Jailhouse Rock when he needed to forget the world and dance on broken pavement. People stopped sometimes, surprised that such a big voice could come from such a small body. Some laughed, some cried, some clapped, and some simply walked on. Miguel learned not to measure his worth by the coins that fell into his guitar case. He measured it by the moments when strangers smiled. One afternoon, a woman with kind eyes listened to him sing near the port. She asked his name, where he learned to sing, and why he sounded like someone far away in time. She told him about an audition happening across the sea, a chance to sing in front of judges who could change a life with a single word. Ireland's Got Talent sounded like a dream too big to touch, but the woman believed in him. She helped him get papers, a borrowed jacket, and a plane ticket that felt heavier than gold. Miguel had never been on a plane. He pressed his face to the window as Cebu shrank below him, whispering a promise to the streets that had raised him. Ireland greeted him with cold air and skies that seemed to stretch forever. The city was different, quieter in some ways, older in others. Stone buildings stood like guardians of history, and the theater where auditions were held glowed warmly against the gray morning. Inside, contestants practiced nervously. Some wore glittering outfits, others carried instruments polished to a shine. Miguel stood apart, his jacket too thin, his shoes borrowed and slightly too big. He held his guitar and breathed, reminding himself that a song was a song no matter where it was sung. When his number was called, his legs trembled as he walked onto the stage. The lights were brighter than any he had known, and for a moment he could not see the judges clearly. Then he heard a familiar voice, sharp and curious, asking his name. Simon Cowell leaned forward, arms crossed, eyes measuring the boy before him. Miguel introduced himself softly, his accent carrying the warmth of home. Simon asked where he was from, and Miguel said Cebu, Philippines. There was a murmur in the room. Simon asked how old he was, and Miguel answered honestly, feeling suddenly small under the weight of attention. Why Elvis? Simon asked, a hint of skepticism in his tone. Miguel swallowed and told the truth. He spoke of his father's tapes, of nights on the street, of how Elvis made him feel less alone. The audience grew quiet. Simon nodded slightly, not smiling, not frowning, simply waiting. The moment stretched, and then Simon gestured for him to begin. Miguel closed his eyes. The first notes trembled, but then the voice settled, deep and rich, rolling through the theater like a tide. He sang Love Me Tender, not as an imitation but as a confession. The words carried the weight of loss and hope, of a child who had learned too early how fragile love could be. The audience leaned forward, judges exchanged glances. Simon's expression changed, the sharp edges softening as the sound filled the room. As Miguel sang, memories flooded him. Nights under flickering streetlights, his mother's smile, the sound of waves against a wooden boat. He forgot the cameras, the judges, the fear. There was only the song and the feeling that if he sang well enough, the world might listen. His voice climbed, steady and sure, and when he reached the final note, it hung in the air like a held breath. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the theater erupted. Applause thundered, cheers rising like a storm. Miguel opened his eyes, stunned. He saw people standing, clapping, wiping tears. One judge pressed a hand to her chest. Another shook his head in disbelief. Simon Cowell stood slowly, the applause washing over him, and for a moment he said nothing. The silence returned, heavy with anticipation. "That was not what I expected," Simon said finally. His voice carried across the room, calm but edged with something else. He spoke of the countless auditions he had seen, of voices that tried too hard to be something they were not. Then he looked directly at Miguel. "What you have is real," he said. "You are not copying Elvis. You are feeling him, and that is rare." Miguel felt tears sting his eyes. He bowed his head, unsure how to respond. Simon asked him to sing another song, something upbeat. Miguel nodded, fingers finding the strings. He launched into Jailhouse Rock, his body moving instinctively, hips swaying, feet tapping. The transformation was electric. The shy boy vanished, replaced by a performer who owned the stage. Laughter and cheers burst from the crowd as Miguel danced, his voice playful and strong. Simon laughed too, a sound that surprised even him. When the song ended, the judges rose to their feet. The applause was louder than before, filling Miguel's chest with warmth. The judges gave their feedback, praising his authenticity, his courage, his story. When it came time for the decision, Simon did not hesitate. "It is a yes from me," he said. The other judges echoed him, and the word yes rang like a bell. Miguel covered his mouth, tears streaming freely now. He bowed again and again, overwhelmed by gratitude. As he left the stage, people reached out to touch his shoulder, to offer smiles and words he could barely hear over the rush in his ears. Backstage, he sat down and let the moment sink in. He thought of Cebu, of the streets that had shaped him, of the friends who had shared scraps of food and laughter. He wished they could see this. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Interviews, rehearsals, fittings for clothes that felt strange against his skin. The competition moved quickly, each round more intense than the last. Miguel practiced tirelessly, determined not to waste the chance he had been given. He sang Elvis, yes, but he also sang songs that spoke of his own journey. The judges watched closely, and Simon in particular seemed invested, offering advice that was blunt but kind. As the show progressed, Miguel's story spread. Viewers at home learned about the street kid from Cebu who sang like a king. Messages poured in from around the world, from people who saw themselves in his struggle. Back in Cebu, friends gathered around small screens, cheering and crying as Miguel appeared again and again, growing more confident with each performance. One night, before a crucial round, Miguel stood alone on the stage after rehearsal. The theater was empty, the seats dark. He sang softly, not for judges or cameras, but for himself. He sang to remember why he had started, why the music mattered. He promised himself that no matter how far he went, he would not forget the boy who sang under streetlights. The live show was a blur of lights and sound. Miguel stepped onto the stage, heart pounding, and sang "Can't Help Falling in Love." His voice carried a new depth, shaped by everything he had experienced since that first audition. The audience listened in rapt silence, and when he finished, the applause was immediate and fierce. Simon nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. After the performance, Simon spoke directly to him. "You know," he said, "people think this show is about winning. It is not. It is about moments like this, when someone reminds us why music matters." Miguel listened, feeling a quiet pride bloom inside him. When the season ended, Miguel did not win the trophy. Another act took the title, and the confetti fell for someone else. But as Miguel stood on the stage during the finale, applauded by thousands, he realized that winning had never been the point. His life had already changed. Opportunities awaited him, chances to record, to perform, to travel. More importantly, he had found a voice that people wanted to hear. Returning to Cebu months later, Miguel walked the familiar streets with new eyes. He visited the places where he had sung for coins, greeting old friends, sharing stories. He played his guitar by the port once more, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. People gathered, recognizing him, listening. He sang Elvis, and he sang his own songs, blending past and present. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miguel sat on the seawall and watched the waves. He thought of Ireland, of the theater, of Simon Cowell's surprised expression. He thought of his parents, of the music they had given him. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Fame was fleeting, and challenges would come. But he also knew that as long as he had his voice, he would never be truly alone. Miguel continued to sing, carrying his story wherever he went. He sang for children who dreamed of more, for adults who had forgotten how to hope. He sang to remind the world that talent can rise from anywhere, that a street kid from Cebu could stand on a stage across the sea and stun a man who had seen it all. And every time he sang an Elvis song, he smiled, feeling the echo of a promise kept.